She didn't raise her voice when she said it. "Just sign it, Mom." I didn't know yet that this moment, standing in my own kitchen, a wooden spoon still in my hand, would be the beginning of everything quietly slipping out of place. Steam rose in soft curls from the pot in front of me. I had been cooking since late morning, setting the table the way I always did when Lauren came over. 3 plates, the good glasses, a small dish I hadn't moved since my husband passed, still kept in the same spot without thinking. I had stood in that kitchen for over 40 years, long enough to know when something felt off. Lauren slid the folder across the table toward me. It stopped neatly in front of my chair pages, already marked with small yellow tabs. Prepared. Eric stood just behind her, one hand resting lightly on the back of the chair. He looked calm, but not quite present, his eyes fixed somewhere just past me, as if he were waiting for a cue. I hadn't even sat down yet. I remember noticing how calm her voice sounded, softer than usual, like she was trying not to startle me. "It's just paperwork," Lauren said, softer now. "We already spoke to a lawyer. This is just to make things easier moving forward. Easier." I glanced at the folder, then back at her. There was a steadiness in her voice that didn't feel natural, like she had practiced saying it before she ever walked into my house. Eric gave a small nod. Quick, subtle, a signal. I set the spoon down and wiped my hand on a towel that still carried a faint trace of lemon soap. The kettle on the counter hadn't started to whistle yet. Everything in the room felt paused mid-motion except for them. They were ready. "I'm not selling my house," I said. The words came out calm, but they settled heavily between us. Lauren didn't hesitate. "Of course you're not," she replied, smiling lightly. "That's not what this is. It's just a precaution, in case anything ever happens. You know how things are now, scams, people taking advantage." "Funny. You don't have to worry about the details anymore," she added almost gently. "Just sign it," she repeated, firmer this time. I looked down again. My name was already printed neatly beneath the signature line. The tabs guided the eye here, 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 like the path had already been decided. "I'd like to read it first," I said. He answered before Lauren did, like he already knew what I was going to ask. Eric shifted behind her, his fingers tightening slightly against the chair. The lawyer already explained everything, he added. "It's standard, nothing complicated." I reached for the folder but didn't open it right away. My thumb traced the edge of the paper. There was a faint indentation like a pen had pressed there before. A small detail, but it stayed with me. Lauren moved toward the counter and poured hot water into my mug without asking. The motion was familiar, but something about it felt misplaced, like she had stepped into a rhythm that wasn't hers. "We just want to help," she said. "Help." There was a small transaction alert on my phone that morning. I didn't remember making it, but I dismissed it too quickly. I told myself I must have forgotten something. I opened the folder. Trust documents, legal terms, power of attorney, clean lines, final language. I didn't understand all of it immediately, but I understood enough to know it wasn't something you rushed through between lunch and tea. "I'll think about it," I said, closing it gently. Lauren's hand rested on the table, but her fingers pressed down harder than before. "We really need to file this week." Need. I had heard that tone before, just not from her. That word didn't belong here. I looked at her more carefully. My daughter, the same girl who once came running into my room when storms got too loud, the one who believed I could fix anything just by being there. Now she stood across from me, asking me not to question something I didn't fully understand. "I said I'll think about it," I repeated. Her expression shifted for a brief second. Not anger, something sharper. Eric stepped in, smoothing the moment before it could break. "No rush," he said lightly. "Just sooner is better." Of course it was. I placed the folder back on the table and finally sat down. The chair felt colder than it should have. Around us, the house carried on as it always did, the hum of the refrigerator, the quiet ticking of the clock. But something had changed. Not loudly. Just enough. I lifted the mug, but didn't drink. The tea was still too hot. "I'll read it tonight," I said. Lauren nodded quickly. "Good. That's all we're asking." All they were asking. I gave a small smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. I've earned the right to take my time. Neither of them argued, but neither of them relaxed. And as I sat there, the folder resting between us like something waiting to be claimed, I couldn't shake the feeling that this moment, this quiet moment in my own kitchen had already been arranged before I ever picked up that spoon. My name is Diane Matthews. I'm 76 years old and I've lived in this house for most of my life. If you're watching from somewhere else, tell me where you are, and whether you would have paused like I did before signing something that didn't feel right. Stay with me, because what happened next wasn't a mistake, because I didn't sign it. Not that day, but I did take the folder with me. And later that night, sitting alone in my living room, I started to understand something I couldn't yet explain. I wasn't being asked. I was being moved. And I still didn't know why. I didn't open the folder right away that night. It stayed on the coffee table for a long time, the yellow tabs catching the light every time I glanced at it. I told myself I would read it after dinner then, after I finished the dishes, then after the news. There was no real reason to wait, and still I did. The house felt different that evening. Nothing obvious, no strange sounds, no movement, but there was a tension underneath everything, like something had started earlier that day and hadn't settled yet. I finally reached for the folder just before 10. The paper felt heavier than it should have. I opened to the first tab, Revocable Living Trust. I read slowly, line by line, the way I always had with anything that mattered. Legal language didn't intimidate me. I had handled the household finances for years, but this felt condensed, like something complex had been made to look simple on purpose. Names, clauses, authority transfers. Lauren's name appeared again and again. So did Eric's. I turned to the next section. Durable Power of Attorney. I paused there. The wording was clean, direct. It granted broad authority, financial decisions, assets, medical choices if necessary. None of that was unusual. People set these things up all the time, but the scope felt immediate. Not if something happens. More like when. I leaned back slightly, letting the page rest in my lap. In the kitchen earlier, Lauren had called this a precaution. This didn't read like one. I moved to the next tab. Property Transfer Provisions. My house was listed by full address, not just mentioned listed. That wasn't standard, at least not in anything I had ever signed before. I read the paragraph again, slower this time. The wording was careful, but the structure underneath it was clear enough. It created a path, a very clean one, too clean. A soft knock came from the hallway. Mom, Lauren. I closed the folder slightly, marking my place with my finger. I'm in here. She stepped into the living room without waiting, her tone light but measured, just checking in. Did you get a chance to look at it? I said. She smiled. It looked right, but something in it didn't settle. It's pretty straightforward. Some of it, I replied. She moved closer, sitting at the edge of the chair across from me. Not too near, just enough to keep me in the conversation. You know I wouldn't bring you anything complicated, she said. That wasn't what concerned me. I glanced down at the page. Why is the house listed like this? There was a pause. Small, controlled. It's just part of the structure, she said. Everything has to be accounted for. Everything. I nodded once slowly. Eric appeared in the doorway a moment later, leaning casually against the frame. How's it going? He asked. Reading, I said. He smiled. That's more than most people do. I didn't answer that. Lauren stood up after a moment. Don't stay up too late, she said. We can go over anything in the morning. Morning. Another assumption. I'll take my time, I replied. She hesitated just slightly, then nodded. Of course. They left together, their voices low as they moved down the hallway. I couldn't hear what they were saying, only the rhythm, quicker than before, less relaxed. I waited until I heard a door close before opening the folder again. This time I skipped ahead. Signatures, witness lines, notary acknowledgement. The notary name was already typed in. Daniel Brooks, Aurora, Illinois. I stared at it longer than I expected to, already filled in, before I had agreed to anything. I closed the folder halfway and rested my hand on top of it. For years I had managed bills, accounts, every small decision that kept a household running. I knew how documents were supposed to feel when they were still open, when they still belonged to you. This didn't feel open. It felt directed. My eyes shifted toward the kitchen. The light was still on, casting a soft glow into the hallway. I stood carrying the folder with me and set it down on the counter. Next to the sink sat a glass of water and the plastic container holding my evening medication. Lauren had started organizing them a few months ago, labeled, sorted by day. It had seemed helpful at the time. I picked it up and opened it. Tuesday. 2 pills. I hesitated. For a moment I couldn't remember if that was what I usually took. I looked closer. The color felt slightly off. Not enough to be obvious, just enough to make me stop. I tried to think back to the night before. I was almost certain it hadn't looked like this. I set the container back down without taking them. The house was quiet again, but it didn't feel the same as before. This quiet felt aware, like something was waiting. I turned off the kitchen light and stood there a moment longer than necessary, looking at my reflection in the dark window. Then I picked up the folder again and carried it back to the living room. I wasn't ready to make any decisions, but I wasn't at ease anymore either. And that feeling, more than anything I had read, stayed with me as I sat down and opened the folder again. The papers, the timing, the way they spoke for me, it didn't feel like separate things anymore. Something wasn't right, not in a way I could prove, but enough to notice. I didn't remember falling asleep. One moment I was in the living room, the folder open in my lap, the lines of text starting to blur together. The next I was waking up in my chair, the lamp still on the house, wrapped in a quiet that felt heavier than it should have. The folder was closed. I was certain I hadn't done that. I sat there for a moment trying to place it, trying to remember the last page I had read, but the memory didn't come back cleanly. It felt interrupted, like something had been cut out of it. I leaned forward slowly and placed my hand on the folder. The edge didn't line up the way it had before, just slightly off, but I noticed things like that. I opened it again. Not at the beginning, somewhere in the middle. The pages didn't sit where I remembered leaving them. I flipped through, carefully looking for something familiar, something that would tell me I was mistaken. Instead, I found something else. A signature line. My name. Written. I stared at it for a long second, not quite letting the thought form. The letters were mine. The shape, the curve, it would pass at a glance. But the spacing wasn't right. The pressure of the pen shifted in places it shouldn't have, like the hand that wrote it had hesitated. I wouldn't hesitate there. My hand doesn't write like that. I traced the name lightly with my fingertip. I didn't remember signing anything. Not last night, not at the table, not anywhere. I turned the page. Another line. Initials this time. Again mine. Again not quite right. This time the feeling settled faster. Not confusion, not doubt. Something closer to recognition. Someone had tried to write my name and expected it to be enough. I closed the folder slowly and held it for a moment. Then I stood. The hallway was dim, the light from the kitchen barely reaching past the corner. Lauren and Eric's door was closed, no sound from inside. Everything looked the same. And still, it didn't feel that way. I walked to the kitchen and set the folder down on the counter. Next to the sink, the pill container was exactly where I had left it. Tuesday. 2 pills. I opened it again, checking without knowing what I expected to find. They looked the same, or maybe I just couldn't be sure anymore. I stared at them longer this time. The color still felt slightly off, not enough to be obvious, just enough to make me pause again. I tried to think back to the night before. I was almost certain it hadn't looked like this. Almost. I closed the container without taking them. For the first time, I didn't trust the small routines that used to feel automatic. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't the same quiet. This one felt aware. I turned off the light and stood there a moment, looking at my reflection in the dark window. Then I picked up the folder and carried it back to the living room. I didn't sleep well. Morning came later than it should have. The light through the curtains felt sharper, harder to adjust to. I sat up slowly, my head heavier than usual, like I hadn't rested at all. For a second, I couldn't place what felt wrong. Then I saw the folder. It was on the dresser, not where I had left it. I stared at it, trying to remember moving it. Nothing came back. I got out of bed and walked toward it, picking it up carefully, as if it might confirm something just by the way it felt. The pages were aligned, too neatly. I set it back down and stepped into the hallway. The house was already awake. I could hear movement in the kitchen cabinets, opening, the low murmur of voices. Lauren's voice. Eric's. Normal. I walked toward it slowly. The first thing I noticed was the table. It had been cleared. Completely. Not just the dishes, everything. The placemats, the tray, even the small dish I had kept near the window for years. That one stopped me. It had never been moved. Now it was gone. "Morning," Lauren said, turning toward me with a smile already in place. "You're up early." Early. I glanced at the clock. It wasn't. Eric stood by the counter pouring coffee like nothing had changed, like everything was exactly where it should be. I looked back at the table, then at the counter. The folder wasn't there anymore. "You moved things," I said. Lauren followed my gaze. "I just cleaned up a bit," she replied easily. "It was getting cluttered." Cluttered. I nodded once, though the word didn't sit right. My eyes drifted toward the living room. The lamp had been turned off. The chair I had fallen asleep in was pushed in slightly straighter than I remembered leaving it. Small things, easy to explain on their own, but together they formed something I couldn't ignore anymore. Things had been moved, not by me. I stood there letting that settle. Lauren said something else. I didn't catch it, because in that moment something shifted. Not suddenly, but clearly enough that I couldn't pretend otherwise. This wasn't confusion. It wasn't forgetfulness. It wasn't random. It was deliberate, and whatever came next had already been set in motion. I stood there a moment longer than I should have. The word stayed in my head. Deliberate. It didn't fade. It didn't soften. It just settled, quiet and certain. Lauren was still talking something about breakfast, about coffee, about the day ahead. I nodded once without really hearing her, because something outside had caught my attention. A car slowed in front of the house. It didn't pass right away. It lingered, then stopped. I turned slightly toward the front window, slow enough that neither of them commented on it. The car door opened. A woman stepped out holding a folder, her posture straight, purposeful. She walked up the path like she knew exactly where she was going. Before I could say anything, the doorbell rang. Lauren froze. Not dramatically, not enough that someone else might notice. But I saw it. Eric straightened just slightly by the counter, his hand tightening around the coffee mug. Then Lauren moved. "I'll get it," she said quickly. Too quickly. The door opened. "Good morning," the woman said, her voice clear, professional. "I'm here for the Matthews property." Property. The word didn't sit right. Lauren stepped aside. "Yes, come in." The woman entered, her gaze sweeping the room briefly before landing on me. "And you must be Mrs. Matthews," she said with a polite smile. "Yes?" I said. She nodded once, opening the folder in her hands. "I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm handling the closing paperwork for your home." For a second, nothing moved. "I'm sorry," I said. "Handling what?" "The closing," she repeated. "For the sale of the property." The words landed cleanly. "I didn't sell my house," I said. There was a pause, a real one. The woman's expression shifted just enough to register something was wrong. She glanced briefly at Lauren, then back at me. No one had mentioned it to me. No one even paused before saying it out loud. "I was told everything had already been finalized," she said carefully. "We're scheduled to complete the transfer this week." This week. Something in my chest tightened. But I didn't look at Lauren. I didn't need to. "No," I said. "That's not correct." Lauren stepped in before the silence could grow. "It's just a misunderstanding," she said quickly. "We've been helping Mom with some paperwork. She gets overwhelmed sometimes. Like I couldn't keep up with my own life." I turned toward her. "I'm not overwhelmed," I said. Eric set his mug down on the counter, the sound soft but precise. "No one's saying you are," he replied calmly. "We're just trying to make things easier," he added. "You don't have to handle everything anymore." Like I was the only one who didn't understand what was happening. A normal conversation. I let that sit for a second, then looked back at the woman. She hesitated, then checked her notes. "We received the documentation through your representatives," she said. Everything appeared to be in order. Representatives. That word settled heavier than the rest. "I didn't authorize anything," I said. Lauren's smile tightened just for a moment. "Mom, We talked about this. You signed. I did not sign anything. My voice didn't rise, but it didn't break. The woman looked between us now, her professionalism giving way to caution. Perhaps I should step outside while you clarify. No, I said. Stay. Eric stepped forward, tone still measured. This isn't necessary. We can handle this privately. Privately for who I asked. He didn't answer. Outside, another sound broke through. An engine, then another. I turned toward the window. A truck had pulled up. Large, white, unmarked. A second vehicle followed behind it. 2 men stepped out, moving with quiet efficiency. My house. They were walking toward my house. What is that? I asked. Lauren didn't answer right away. Eric did. Just movers, he said. We scheduled them in advance. The first man didn't knock. He stepped up to the door like he'd been there before, one hand already reaching for the handle, the other gripping a folded blanket draped over his arm. Behind him, the second man moved in sync, lifting a dolly from the truck with a quiet efficiency that felt practiced. The engine outside was still running. Low, steady, like it wasn't planning to leave anytime soon. For a second, no one in the room said anything. Not Lauren, not Eric, not the woman holding the paperwork. I watched as the front door opened wider. Not by me. A draft of cool air slipped into the hallway, carrying the faint smell of the street inside rubber dust, something unfamiliar. The man stepped over the threshold without hesitation, like the house already belonged to him, and that was the moment it stopped feeling like a conversation, in advance. The words settled into place. The folder, the signatures, the notary, the pills. Everything had already been arranged. I turned back toward them slowly. You scheduled movers, I said. Lauren stepped closer, her voice softer now. We're doing this for you. It's safer this way. You don't have to manage everything on your own anymore. Safer. Like this was reasonable. Like I was the one catching up. I looked at her, really looked this time. You sold my house, I said. She didn't correct me. She didn't deny it. She just held my gaze. And in that silence, everything settled. Not confusion, not misunderstanding. Betrayal. It wasn't the house that unsettled me. It was how easily they had decided without me. I remember just standing there trying to understand how it had gone that far, like the ground had shifted and I hadn't felt it happen. And for a moment, nothing made sense anymore. What would you have done in that moment? Walk away or confront them right there? Because what came next was worse. I felt it then not as a shock, but as something steady and final. They hadn't asked. They hadn't waited. Every step had already been set, and they expected me to accept it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I didn't move. I just stood there in my own home watching strangers approach the door while my daughter explained why it was necessary. And in that moment I understood something clearly for the first time. This wasn't help. This wasn't concern. This was control. I didn't argue when they told me to pack a few things. Not because I agreed, but because I was still trying to understand how far it had already gone. Lauren moved through the house with a quiet efficiency I didn't recognize, drawers opening, closets, shifting decisions made without asking. Her voice stayed gentle, almost careful, but nothing about what she was doing felt like a question. Eric handled the rest. Short phone calls, low voices, a calm tone that didn't change no matter what I said. It's temporary, he told me, just until everything settles. I didn't ask what that meant. I already knew. By the time the movers started carrying things out, I wasn't standing in the doorway anymore. I was sitting in the living room watching pieces of my life pass through the front door in steady, practiced hands. Nothing about it felt rushed. That was what stayed with me. Everything felt arranged. Lauren came to stand beside me at some point. "We'll make sure you're comfortable," she said softly. "You don't have to worry about anything." I didn't answer, because worry wasn't the word anymore. The drive didn't take long. I watched the road more than I watched them counting turns without meaning to. We didn't go far. That surprised me. For some reason I had expected distance to be part of it. Instead it was close enough that everything I knew still felt within reach. Just not mine anymore. The building came into view, a clean exterior, large windows, a sign placed neatly near the entrance. Sunrise Senior Living. I read it twice. Lauren shifted slightly in her seat. It's a good place, she said. We looked at a few. It's only for a little while. I nodded. The car came to a stop. Inside, everything was bright. The air carried a faint floral scent, something meant to feel welcoming. The floors were spotless, the furniture arranged in careful clusters that looked more staged than lived in. A woman at the front desk greeted us with a practiced smile. "Welcome," she said, already reaching for a folder. "We've been expecting you." Expecting? Lauren stepped forward before I could speak. Names were exchanged, papers referenced, dates confirmed. I stood slightly behind her, listening. At one point, the woman glanced at me. "Mrs. Matthews, we're so glad you're here. We'll take very good care of you." Care. No one asked me if that was okay. They just wrote it down like it had already been decided. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "We'll list your daughter as the primary contact as noted." Primary. I looked at Lauren. She didn't look back. They led us down a hallway lined with identical doors, some open, some closed. A television played somewhere in the distance, voices blending into something indistinct. My room was near the end. Small, clean, neutral, a bed, a chair, a dresser, a window facing a trimmed lawn that didn't feel real. Lauren set my bag down. "See," she said. "It's nice." Nice. Eric stayed near the door. "We'll check in later," he said. "Just get settled. Get settled." I looked around again. There was nothing here that belonged to me. Lauren stepped closer and smoothed the blanket at the edge of the bed, her hands moving automatically, like she used to when I was the one taking care of her. "You'll feel better once you rest," she said. "Rest." I nodded. Because it was easier than saying anything else, they didn't stay long. A few more words. Then they left. The door closed softly behind them, and the quiet that followed wasn't the quiet of my house. This one felt contained, measured. I sat down on the bed, slowly, my hands resting in my lap, trying to hold on to something familiar. There wasn't much. After a while, a nurse knocked and stepped inside. She introduced herself, her tone warm, her movements practiced. She explained the basics, mealtimes, schedules, routines. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small cup. 2 pills. I looked at them. "They're part of your evening routine," she said. "Your daughter made sure everything was transferred over. Transferred." I didn't reach for them. For a moment, I just looked at the cup in her hand. The pills were similar to the ones I had seen the night before. Not identical, but close enough. "I usually take them later," I said. She smiled gently. "We like to keep things consistent here." Consistent. I tried to remember if anyone had explained what they were for. I couldn't. I took the cup from her hand. The plastic felt light. I hesitated. No one had asked me. No one had explained anything, and still it was already decided. I set the cup down on the table beside the bed. "I'll take them in a minute." She nodded, but she didn't leave. She stayed where she was waiting, not impatient, not forceful, just present. That same quiet pressure. I picked up the cup again, and this time I didn't wait as long. Because something in me had already begun to understand this wasn't about comfort, it wasn't about rest, it wasn't about care, it was about control, and I was already inside it. I didn't feel different after I took the pills. Not right away. That was what unsettled me. If something was wrong, I expected to feel it. A change, a shift, something I could point to. Instead, everything stayed the same. The room, the light, the quiet, just softer, edges dulled, thoughts slower to settle into place. I lay back on the bed without meaning to, staring at the ceiling, trying to hold on to the clarity I had felt only moments before. Control. That word had been sharp in my mind. Now it felt distant, not gone, just harder to reach. The next morning came without a clear memory of when I had fallen asleep. The light through the window was already bright. The room looked exactly the same as it had the night before, as if nothing had shifted at all. But something had. I sat up slowly, letting my feet touch the floor, grounding myself in small movements. The routine felt unfamiliar here, time-structured, decided somewhere outside of me. A knock came at the door. Not a question, a signal. "Breakfast is in 15 minutes," a voice called through the door. 15 minutes. I looked at the clock. I hadn't asked what time anything happened, and yet everything already had a time. I got dressed slowly, choosing my clothes more carefully than necessary, as if the act itself might anchor me to something I still controlled. The hallway outside my room was quieter than I expected. A few doors open, a few residents moving at a pace that didn't quite match the day. Some looked past me, some didn't look at all. I followed the direction of the voices until I reached a larger room near the front. Tables arranged in rows, plates already set. A low hum of conversation that didn't quite rise or fall. I hesitated at the entrance. Then I stepped inside. A woman sitting near the far end of the room looked up as I walked in. She held my gaze longer than the others had. Not curious, not distracted. Present. I sat down at a table near her, leaving a small space between us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said quietly, "First day." I nodded. She didn't smile. They say it the same way every time, like it's meant to calm you down before anything changes. "They always say it's temporary," she added. The words landed with a familiarity that felt too exact. I turned toward her. "You've heard that before." She gave a small, almost tired nod. More than once. There was no bitterness in her voice, just certainty. My daughter said the same thing I said. Of course she did. I looked at her more carefully now. There was something steady about her, not resigned, not defeated, aware. They move fast at the beginning. She continued, "Paperwork, decisions, everything already in place before you realize what's happening. Paperwork." I felt the echo of the folder in my hands. "They told me I signed," I said. She met my eyes. "Did you?" "No." She nodded once, like that answer didn't surprise her at all. "They don't always need you to," she said quietly. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not confusion, recognition. I leaned slightly closer. "What do you mean?" She glanced around the room briefly, not nervously, just aware, then lowered her voice a fraction. "Power of attorney," she said. "Medical authorization. Trust transfers. Once those are in place, they don't ask anymore." The words fell into place with everything I had already seen. The documents, the signatures, the way everything had moved without me. They told me it was to help, I said. They always do. For a moment, we sat in silence. The sounds of the room continued around us, plates being set down, chairs, shifting, quiet conversations that didn't quite connect. I tried to call someone the first week, she said after a moment. "My sister." "What happened?" "They said it was better if I rested first, that I wasn't thinking clearly yet." Rest. The same word. I felt something sharpen again, cutting through the softness that still lingered in my thoughts. "Did you ever reach her?" I asked. She shook her head once. "By the time I insisted, it was already complicated." Complicated. Another word that hid more than it explained. I looked down at my hands. "They're doing the same thing to me," I said. She didn't respond right away. Then quietly, "Yes." There was no hesitation in it. No doubt. Just confirmation. I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of that settle into something more solid. Not confusion anymore. Not even fear. Something closer to clarity. "They think I won't notice," I said. She looked at me, then really looked. "They think you won't act." That landed differently. I lifted my eyes to hers. For the first time since I had walked into that building, something inside me didn't feel contained. It felt steady. "I remember everything I said. Most people don't realize what's happening until it's too late. Then that's your advantage." I sat back slightly, letting that thought take shape. Advantage. A word I hadn't considered. Until now. "They control the schedule," she continued. "The calls, the medication, everything that makes you feel slower. Slower." I nodded once. "I felt it last night." She studied me for a moment, then said, "Then don't give them more than you have to." I understood what she meant, not all at once, but enough. The room around us didn't change, the voices stayed low, the routine continued, but something in me had shifted, not outwardly, nothing anyone else would notice. But internally something had settled into place. They had planned this, they had expected me to accept it, they had assumed I would stay quiet. I looked down at the table at the place setting that had already been arranged before I sat down, then back at her. "I won't," I said. She didn't smile, but she nodded. And that was enough. I didn't leave that day, not immediately. Ruth's words stayed with me, but I didn't rush anything. If they controlled the timing, then I needed to understand it before I moved against it. So I followed the routine. Breakfast at the same hour, medications offered at the same times, check-ins that sounded casual but always happened on schedule. I paid attention, not to what they told me, but to what repeated. By the second day, I knew which staff rotated in the mornings, which nurse lingered longer than necessary, which doors stayed unlocked for a few extra minutes between shifts. Small things, patterns. Ruth had been right. Everything here was controlled, but not perfectly. On the third morning, I didn't take the pills, not in the way they expected. I held the cup knotted when the nurse watched and waited until she turned away before setting them down behind the glass of water. A small decision, but it mattered. Within an hour, the difference was clear. My thoughts came faster, sharper. The fog I hadn't fully recognized the night before began to lift. That confirmed it. They weren't just keeping me here, they were keeping me quiet. I waited until mid-morning when the hallway was busier, when attention scattered just enough to create space. Then I walked. Not quickly, not cautiously, just normally, like I belonged there. The front desk was occupied, a phone call, papers spread across the counter. No one stopped me as I passed. The door opened without resistance, and just like that I stepped outside. The air felt different, not cleaner, just uncontained. I didn't stop walking until I reached the end of the block. Only then did I slow down, letting the distance settle into something real. I was out. Not free, but out. The street looked familiar, closer than I expected. I turned once, orienting myself, then headed in the direction that felt most certain. Carol's house wasn't far. I hadn't spoken to her in a few weeks, not since before all of this had started, but she was the one person I trusted to listen without deciding for me. When I reached her door, I didn't hesitate. I knocked. There was a pause inside, then footsteps. The door opened slowly. "Diane," she said, surprised. I nodded once. "I need your help." She didn't ask questions right away. She stepped aside and let me in. That was enough. Inside, everything felt grounded in a way I hadn't realized I had been missing. The furniture wasn't arranged for appearances. The light wasn't too bright. Nothing felt managed. Carol closed the door behind me. "What happened?" I took a breath, steadying myself. "They sold my house," I said. Her expression shifted instantly. "What I didn't sign anything," I continued. "But they have documents. A trust, power of attorney. My name is on it." She stared at me for a moment, processing. "Sit," she said. "I didn't. I need to see the paperwork," she added. "It's not with me," I said. "But I know what was in it." That was enough to start. Carol moved quickly, then not frantic, but focused. She pulled out her laptop, set it on the table, and opened it with a kind of familiarity that grounded the moment. "Let's check the property records first," she said. "Records. Public." I watched as she typed in the address. My address. The page loaded. I had never seen my name on something like that without being the one who signed it. There it was. Listed, transferred. My name still attached, but alongside another. Lauren. The date sat just beneath it. Recent. Too recent. At that exact time, I remembered standing in my kitchen still holding the folder. "That's not possible," I said. Carol didn't respond immediately. She clicked into the details, scrolling through the records slowly. "There's a deed transfer here," she said, "filed 2 days ago. 2 days." I tried to place it. That was before the realtor. Before the movers, before I had even finished reading the folder, it was already done, I said. Carol looked at me. Do you have any idea who notarized it? I nodded slowly. Daniel Brooks, Aurora. She searched the name. Results appeared quickly. Licensed, active. But something else stood out. Look at this, she said, turning the screen toward me. A timestamp, the notarization time. I leaned closer. The date matched, but the time didn't. It was logged late afternoon. At that exact time, I had been in my kitchen, with Lauren, holding that folder, not signing it, not even opening half of it yet. That's not right, I said. Carol nodded. No, it's not. She scrolled further. There's also a submission record, she added, filed electronically. From where? She clicked again, then paused. Not from your home address, she said. It's from a different location, a gap, a shift in the timeline, something that didn't line up. I felt it then not as confusion, but as something clearer. Evidence. They didn't just move fast, I said. They moved ahead of me. Carol met my eyes. Yes, she said, and they assumed you wouldn't catch up. I looked back at the screen. The names, the dates, the details that didn't quite fit together. For the first time since all of this had started, the situation felt structured, not just something that had happened to me, something that could be followed, proven. I straightened slightly, my thoughts settling into something more deliberate. They made a mistake, I said. Carol raised an eyebrow. What kind? I looked at the timestamp again. Then at the filing record. Then back at her. The kind that leaves a trail. We didn't go to the lawyer right away, not because it wasn't urgent, but because Carol wanted everything clear before we walked in. Details matter, she said, especially when someone is counting on you not understanding them. So we went through everything again. The deed, the timestamp, the notary record, every line, every gap, every place where something didn't match. By the time we sat down in the office the next afternoon, I wasn't just explaining what had happened. I was showing it. The lawyer introduced himself simply Mark Ellison. Mid-50s measured the kind of voice that didn't rush ahead of itself. He listened without interrupting as Carol laid out the sequence. I watched his expression more than I listened to my own story being repeated. Not surprise, not disbelief, recognition. When she finished, he leaned back slightly in his chair, hands folded. Let me ask you a few things, he said. I nodded. Did you ever sign anything related to a trust, a property transfer, or a power of attorney? No. Did you ever meet with a notary in the last week? No. Did you authorize anyone to sign on your behalf? No. He held my gaze for a moment longer as if weighing something. Then what you're describing is not a misunderstanding, he said. There was no hesitation in it, no softening, not confusion, not a mistake. Something done knowing I wouldn't be asked. It's fraud. The word didn't shock me. Not anymore. It just settled into place beside everything else. Deliberate. Planned. Now defined. Mark turned back to the screen, pulling up the records Carol had already found. This timestamp here, he said, pointing, is critical. If you can establish where you were at that exact time, and it doesn't match the notarization, we have a problem for them. I was at home, I said, with them. Good, he replied. That gives us a starting point. He moved quickly then, but not hurriedly, asking for specifics, clarifying sequences, building the timeline piece by piece. When did the realtor show up the next morning? And the movers at the same time. He nodded, typing something into his notes. They filed before they acted, he said. That's consistent with someone trying to secure control first, then execute. Secure control. The phrase stayed with me. That means they needed the documents to appear valid. He continued. Which brings us back to the notary. He clicked again, opening a separate record. Daniel Brooks is licensed, he said, but that doesn't mean he was present. Carol leaned forward slightly. You think the notarization could be false. I think it needs to be verified, he said. Either he signed off without proper identification, which is a violation, or someone used his credentials improperly. Either way, it wasn't clean. Mark turned back to me. I'm going to be direct, he said. What they've done only works if no one challenges it. The longer it goes unquestioned, the stronger their position becomes. I understood that. They moved quickly, I said. Yes, he replied. And they assumed you wouldn't catch up. The same pattern. Repeated. Mark closed the file and leaned forward slightly. The first step is to stop further damage, he said. We file an emergency motion to freeze the transfer and any associated authority. That prevents them from completing the sale or moving assets while this is being reviewed. Freeze. For the first time since I had walked into that office, something shifted. Not emotionally, structurally. They can't move forward after that, I asked. Not without scrutiny, he said, and right now scrutiny is exactly what they don't want. He began outlining the next steps. Affidavit. Timeline reconstruction, verification of presence, notary inquiry, each piece built on the last forming something that felt solid, not reactive, intentional. That's how control is built step by step until it looks like care from the outside. They also placed you in a facility, he added. That raises additional concerns. I looked at him. What kind control, he said simply. Limiting access, restricting communication, establishing a narrative of incapacity. It strengthens their position if no one questions it. Incapacity. I felt the word settle differently than the others. Not just a tactic, a strategy. They told people I was overwhelmed, I said. He nodded. That fits. Carol glanced at me, then back at him. What about the medication? Mark's expression tightened slightly. We'll need records, he said. What was administered when and under whose authority? Records. Another trail. We can get those, I asked. Yes, he said. Especially now. He paused, then looked directly at me again. This is important, he said. From this point forward, you don't confront them directly. I held his gaze. Why not? Because right now, he said, they believe this is settled. They believe you're contained. That gives us an advantage. Advantage. I thought about Ruth, about what she had said. They think you won't act. Mark continued. If you alert them too soon, they adjust. They close gaps. They change behavior. We lose visibility. That made sense. We need them to keep moving the way they have been, he said. That's how we document it. I nodded slowly. Not because it was easy, but because it was clear. For the first time, everything that had happened didn't feel random anymore. It felt like a system, and systems once understood could be taken apart. Mark gathered the documents into a single file and set them in front of him. I'll start the filings today, he said. You did the hardest part already. I didn't respond right away, because I wasn't sure that was true. But I understood something else now. This wasn't over. Not even close. And the next step wouldn't be quiet. I didn't go back to the house right away, not alone. Mark arranged it. A formal notice first, then a scheduled visit documented, witnessed, controlled. When we pulled up, the truck was gone. The front looked the same as it always had, the same walkway, the same windows, but I knew better. Lauren opened the door before we knocked. She must have been watching. Her expression didn't break, not immediately, just a slight tightening around the eyes, something measured settling into place. Mom, she said, like nothing had happened. I stepped forward. Mark stayed just behind me. Eric appeared a moment later from the hallway, his posture shifting the second he saw we weren't alone. Who is this? He asked. My attorney, I said. That landed. Silence followed, not empty, but recalculating. Lauren's smile returned softer now. We didn't realize this needed to be so formal, she said. It does, Mark replied. We're here regarding the transfer of the Matthews property, he continued, and the authority under which it was executed. Eric crossed his arms slightly. Everything was done legally, he said. She signed the documents. I looked at him. You didn't even wait for me to understand what was happening. You knew I hadn't signed, I said. That shifted something. Not visibly, but enough. Lauren stepped in quickly. Mom, you were confused. You said yourself you didn't remember. I remember enough, I said. My voice stayed calm, but it held. Mark stepped forward slightly. We have the notarization record, he said, time-stamped at a time when Mrs. Matthews can account for her location, and it does not match. Eric's expression tightened. "We also have concerns regarding the execution of the power of attorney," Mark continued, "and the subsequent placement of Mrs. Matthews in a controlled facility under that authority." Lauren's voice sharpened. "We were helping her." No one answered that. I looked around the house. My house. Some things had changed. Small things, enough to feel it. But I didn't focus on that. I stayed where I was. "You made decisions for me," I said. Lauren met my eyes. "Because you needed someone to." "No." The word came out steady. "I needed time." That landed harder than anything else. Eric shifted again. "This is unnecessary," he said. "If there's a concern, we can resolve it privately." "Not anymore," Mark said. Outside, a car passed. Inside, nothing moved. And for a moment I could see it clearly. They still thought they were in control. The courtroom was quieter than I expected. Not empty, just contained. Everything moved with precision. Names called, files handed over, voices kept level. I sat beside Mark, my hands resting lightly in my lap. Lauren and Eric sat across the room, separated now. When my name was called, I stood. The walk to the front felt longer than it was. I took my place and faced forward. "State your name for the record." "Diane Matthews." Mrs. Matthews. Mark said, "Did you at any point authorize the transfer of your home to another party?" "No." "Did you sign any documents related to that transfer?" "No." "Were you present for a notarization on the date listed in the record?" "Number." Mark guided the timeline. Where I had been. What had been presented. What I had not agreed to. Then the documents were introduced. The deed, the timestamp, the notary record, each one placed where it belonged. Across the room, Lauren watched. Still, focused. Eric looked down more than he looked up. When it was their turn, their explanation followed a different rhythm. Concern, responsibility, care, words I had already heard. But here they didn't settle the same way, because now they had to stand against something. Evidence. The notary record was questioned. The timing, the location, the process. The story they had been repeating started to shift under its own weight. Each detail pressed, each gap exposed. Explanations began to shift. Small adjustments at first, then larger ones. I sat back down when I was finished. My hands returned to my lap. The same position, but not the same feeling. Because now I wasn't trying to understand what had happened. I was watching it come apart. And for the first time since all of this had begun, the story wasn't being shaped around me. It was being laid out, clearly, out loud, and this time it didn't belong to them anymore. For the first time, I wasn't trying to catch up. I was finally standing where I needed to be. The decision didn't come immediately. There was no moment where everything stopped and someone announced it like it would settle everything that had come before. Instead, it unfolded quietly. By the time the judge returned, the room had already shifted, not in movement, but in weight, the kind of stillness that comes when something has already been understood before it's spoken. I sat where I had been, my hands resting in my lap, not trying to anticipate anything anymore, because for the first time I didn't need to. When the ruling was read, the words were clear. The transfer was invalid. The notarization was improperly executed. The power of attorney was suspended. It didn't feel like a victory. It felt like something being put back where it should have been. Across the room, Lauren didn't react right away. She sat still, composed, as if she was still holding on to the version of events she had built. Eric looked down. He didn't look up again. There was more after that. Financial review, asset tracing. Everything that had been moved would be examined. It would take time, but for the first time, time was no longer working against me. I didn't move back into the house. Not because I couldn't, because I didn't want to. By the time everything was legally restored in my name, the house had already become something else, not unsafe, but no longer mine in the way that mattered, so I sold it. Not out of loss, out of choice. This time, every document was reviewed, every signature witnessed, every step mine. The sale went through cleanly. The money went exactly where I decided it would go. After that, I updated everything. My will, my accounts, my directives. Structured in a way that didn't depend on anyone else deciding for me. I didn't remove Lauren completely, but I changed what she could touch, what she could decide. That wasn't anger. It was clarity. I moved into a smaller place not long after, a quiet apartment with a narrow balcony that looked out over a row of trees that changed color slowly as the days passed. The first morning there, I woke up earlier than I needed to, out of habit. For a moment, I stayed still listening. No footsteps in the hallway, no voices outside the door, no one waiting for me to follow a schedule I hadn't chosen, just silence. For a second, I stood there unsure if I needed to ask permission for anything. I got up, walked into the kitchen, and made coffee the way I always had, without measuring, without thinking, just by memory. I carried the cup to the balcony and sat down. The air was cool. The street below was already moving, but slowly. No urgency, no pressure, and for the first time in a long time, nothing felt like it was already decided for me. Her messages are careful now, like every word has been thought through before it's sent. I still hear from Lauren sometimes, short messages, careful ones, nothing that mentions the house, nothing that mentions the case. I don't always respond. When I do, I keep it simple, because some things don't need to be explained twice. I used to think I would recognize the moment when everything changed. But it didn't feel like that. It felt quieter, like noticing something small and deciding not to ignore it. If you were in that moment, would you stay quiet or would you stop it before it went any further? I really want to know what you would have done. And if this story stayed with you, let me know with a like. Share it with someone who might need it. And stay with me for more stories like this. Because in the end, I didn't need to win. I just needed my life to be mine again.